So this is part two of my analysis of Wallace Stevens' poem "Earthly Anecdote." I think the last thing I spoke about in introducing the poem is the fire cat is of an uncertain nature. Um, now, I think I said that because of the terms of the poem, an earthy anecdote, um, that we eliminate fantastical creatures. So the notion of of an elemental of fire taking the form of a cat is probably not what's intended here. I was doing a little bit of reading. Usually what I do is I'll get as much out of a poem that I can. Then I'll take a look at what others have said. And one person, I think actually a translator, was struggling with how to translate Firecat into Italian. And others were talking about the Firecat as being perhaps a cougar or some great cat uh, predator of the wild. And that made a lot of sense to me, particularly as the bucks would probably be the prey of a great cat predator in the rural areas of a place like Oklahoma. And while that's true, when I thought of what has been said and what's said of the fire cat, it bristles in the way. And so I think I want to stick, I don't know if that I officially said it, well, in choosing this image here, I'm thinking of essentially a domestic house cat that's bristling as they do to increase their size in the way as they're shocked or alarmed by something. Generally, apex predators are not going to be um, frightened or put off or intimidated. They're they might bristle, but they're more going to pounce, and they're more likely just to attack you and devour you. So on to the poem. Wherever they went clattering until they swerved in a swift circular line to the right because of the fire cat. Well, starting off with these first two lines of the stanza. Wherever they went clattering. My goodness, there is like this swagger to this group. Um, uh, it's actually two, I believe, but so far it might just be a group because we haven't gone terribly far into the poem yet. They're strutting their stuff out there in the wild, kicking up all sorts of sound and fury, um, either with their hooves um, against the ground, but again, I tend not to think that this is the result uh, of hooves on a surface because there generally aren't such surfaces. I mean, you might hear a thud, like sort of a gallop. If they were doing that, they would really have to be on a hard surface. So the clattering, I believe, and it it follows from earthy, is the rutting. It's the collision where two bucks are dueling and they collide with one another and they lock horns, they lock antlers with a great crash, and that is, of course, that would create the classic clattering sound. But as I said, in a sense, there's a display. They want to be seen, and they do, because they are swaggering out in front of the does with whom they want to uh, procreate. They want to mate with the females of their species. Also, the use of wherever kind of delocalizes them. Originally, we had them confined. Well, I mean, you can say they are confined. They are located within Oklahoma, but within Oklahoma, Oklahoma is the place of places. Where are they in this place? One event is distinct from another, or at least one event will only pertain to one particular place and will be unknown to all other places. But this appears to happen in each and every spot they go. There's the swagger and then a swerve, until they swerved in a swift circular line to the right because of the fire cat. But that's not all. Or until they swerved in a swift circular line to the left because of the fire cat. So let's stay with the motion. They are swaggering in their clattering, and yet they come across in their path. Let's imagine that they're lining up, they're going to go, and in the way is the fire cat. And at that moment, they forget. They're snapped out of this blind rage that propels them. Uh, Perhaps they do without water and food and without concern of harm to themselves by their headlong race into one another that can leave them seriously injured for whatever reason, this cat. And I guess that's another reason why it makes sense that it's a domestic cat. This injects some comedy in it. These two massive beasts, most likely, if they're mature bucks, are terrified of this cat and they swerve. To swerve, of course, is to move to avert a collision, to avoid a collision with something, as cars on a street. But what's interesting is it describes that this swerve has a particular shape to it. It is in a swift circular line. On the one hand, the word swift just emphasizes, I guess, what we know, that they are traveling quickly, although it's still an interesting word. I'm going to come back to it. A circular line. Well, if you notice, it didn't merely say they swerved in a curve to avoid. They swerved in a swift circular line. Well, of course, what is a circular line but a circle? So I posit the following. In the center of the circle is the fire cat. And the two bucks, not a group of them, two bucks, which actually makes sense as well because the last thing that a buck in the rutting season is going to tolerate is another buck. And once that buck it sets its sights upon, it's going to either drive it away or engage in personal combat with to dispatch it, so it has the does to itself. The fire cat bristles in the way. So what do they do? Well, they swerved in a circular line to the right. Now, of course, this is a matter of perspective. The right for buck number one is like this. But from the perspective of buck one, a swerve to the right would look like that. Now, what are the consequences of this? Well, if we extend this, we would say at the very least, well, if they truly are in a circle, now I don't think that there's necessarily this in the poem, they would both wind up in orbit of the fire cat forever. But at the very, very least, their duel has been interrupted. Now, of course, in the bounds of the earth, this is an absurdity. If these truly are bucks, creatures of the wild, not domesticated like our friend the cat, they cannot be deterred from their path, and yet the cat, the domesticated cat, merely by bristling, has broken them out of, in a sense, domesticated them, has broken them as one might break a horse, as one might, as a cowboy does to a bucking bronco. And therefore, it's essentially an encroachment on the wild of the domestic. Although, of course, it is also comic that a fire cat, a cat that's red like fire, that bristles, is able to affect the destruction of the wild, the breaking of the wild. And of course, what else happened to the West? If we want to also push it this way, that as civilization moved outward, the wildness of the great interior was reduced ever further. Again, these are all things that are not necessarily in the poem, but they're not out of place with these kind of this thought or this discussion that we're having. Now, of course, that's not the only possibility. Two things happen. Either this happens, or they swerved in a swift circular line to the left. I don't have to probably draw this, but this is the other possibility. So again, when they swerve to the right, it looks like this. They avoid each other. No collision. Their mating season is interrupted. If they swerve to the left, they avoid each other. Their mating season, the rutting season, is interrupted as well. Now, something else I just thought of, it says wherever they went. So wherever means that within Oklahoma, they tried this in many, 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 maybe countless places. Perhaps they had this desire, obviously, to procreate, to be wild creatures, but they were always thwarted in each and every place. The only uncertainty, well, let's put it, what was certain are the conditions. Always there was going to be the fire cat to thwart their desire to procreate, to attract a mate. But in each case, there was an essential freedom from this certainty. Either this would happen, they would either, dare I say, choose to swerve to the right or choose to swerve to the left. Now, when you pose it like this, it almost sounds like this is some very fundamental discussion of free will because they seem to have two choices open to them, and they took one or they took the other. Now, what's funny is that in each case, although right and left are open to both of them, they always swerve in the same direction. Um, and so this would be a funny kind of free will in which both bucks always choose the same direction. They always choose the same left or right, the same direction of their swerve. I mean, I might almost want to call it a sort of certain deterministic free will, or uh, a collision, a collision of these two opposites, because they're both determined in this way. They're locked into the same thought, and yet it's not predictable whether or not they'll both go to the left or to the right because it's either or. And it never says that there's a preponderance of right versus left, just that these are the two possibilities. Now, what if there were true free will available here? What would be an outcome? Well, I mean, you could also say that it's completely fine that they are both free to choose and they both choose the same direction. Um, but what if they choose opposite directions? Well, in that case, which doesn't happen, we're told, they do collide, and they would keep clattering under those conditions. Now, notice since that doesn't happen, the clattering stopped as soon as the fire cat introduced itself. Now, what's funny here is that, well, in effect, they've done the same thing, haven't they? They've still collided. They've locked antlers with each other, but it wasn't a function of that blind rage. They're no longer wild creatures. They are human-like, which of course is now out of bounds of the terms of the poem. These are wild animals that are behaving like human beings, that are uh, attempting to preserve themselves from pain. And so by avoiding pain, they collide with each other. But it's not the collision that we that arises from the natural state of wild creatures in a blind, in blind lust. Again, the other sense of earthy, these matters that are libidinal or lascivious. They're we are in a sense talking about the matters of the flesh. Although, of course, this is also ironic because we normally, when we talk about matters of the flesh, we're talking about human beings, not bucks. So there's a great deal of irony in here. And a number of things that I just said are elements of Epicurean philosophy. Now, this might seem to be a major departure from the poem, but bear with me. Epicurus was a Greek philosopher, a near contemporary of Aristotle. If you notice, their lives overlap by about 20 years. He was born after Plato, and of course, well after the pre Socratics, which who I mentioned again for a very specific reason. Well, first, what we most know about Epicurus is, I think, if you talk about an Epicurean delight, you're generally talking about something that enhances pleasure. As pleasure is, in an Epicurean view, the rightful the rightful pursuit of life, or more precisely, the avoidance of pain, which of course can manifest as pleasure but doesn't have to. Now, if you notice, I mentioned those bucks that were uh, in their wild state, in their natural state, they were pursuing pain. They were willing to absorb pain and to inflict pain. But now, in the presence of this figure, they avoid. And we can only avoid that when you swerve from something, you're avoiding a collision because, on some level, you want to avoid some sort of discomfort, or you want to avoid something that happens that would happen that would pose something that was really very unpleasant for you, either on the physical or a psychological level. So, in this particular way, we can almost say that uh, the Bucks are avoiding collisions by their actions here. So it's like as though that they're under the stars of Epicurus and they are following an Epicurean moral philosophy because they are avoiding pain by what they're doing. Now, if you notice the last thing I said, if there really were free will, if there truly were free will, then they would be colliding. And and of course that would go against then their pain would be merely of an accidental nature. But it would seem that by the very embrace of free will, if they were actually to do that, they would be opening themselves up to a lot of accidental pain, which is an ironic twist on Epicurean philosophy. Now, for the Greeks, there was no distinction between philosophy, moral philosophy, and what they would call natural philosophy. So when they were talking about the moral philosophy of pain avoidance, the other side of the coin was the whole notion of free will. Um, and the possibilities. In other words, why is there free will and not strict determinism? Because to say that there's free will for Epicurus was also the precondition for a world that is of form and not chaotic. What do I mean by that? Well, let's sketch Epicurus's cosmology. So here we are. Here's the deterministic universe. These are atoms. So Epicurus was um, influenced by such pre-Socratic thinkers as Democritus, who said that atoms, discrete bits of matter, were the building blocks of the universe. Matter was not continuous, as people like thinkers like Plato would have said. But for Epicurus, not only was the universe consisting of, um, of atoms, meaning indivisible particles, these were particles in motion. All particles were moving downward. They began in heaven, I suppose, and they moved downward through the void. So originally, there were just atoms in the void, the original state of things. However, one day there was a swerve, or as Epicurus called it, a clinema. And as a result of this clinema, there was a collision. And as a result of collision, matter coalesced and the world became a world of form and not meaningless, disaggregated atoms in a chaos of non-interaction. Without this swerve, matter would never have arisen in a recognizable form, and therefore neither would creatures such as ourselves. So then again, according to Epicurus, the world first consisted of atoms traveling downward in the void at the same speed, never interacting until an uncaused cause caused the clinema, the swerve to happen, which brought atoms into collision and therefore was the basis of form arising in the universe. Now, what does this have to do with free will? Well, everything in the original scheme is deterministic, atoms falling downward in the void. Now, for there to be free will, there must be something unspecified, not of the atom itself. Um, Outside of the atom, we can't really say. Epicurus never says what the cause of the clinema is, but there must be something uncaused that is absolutely not, not dependent on what it sees in front of it, what's coming down the road. So, in the very fact that we have to make an assumption, if this applies to the poem, then there were two possibilities open to the Bucks under the same exact conditions. The one condition was the cat, and as a result of this cat being there, they either went one way or another. Now, for that cat to be an aspect of free will, what results would not be determined by the cat. If it were determined, there would only be one direction. There would be only one thing that could possibly happen that could follow from that particular cause there. But the nature of this thing, this phenomenon, maybe we can't call it a phenomenon, uncaused cause, is that there are a number of possible decisions that can follow from it, but that's really not open to analysis because in order to analyze something, we have to get back to the roots the uh, of the decision, and any sort of analysis is going to seek a situation where only one possible decision could have arisen. It's certainly true when we talk about laws of the universe. There's only one possible action. Now, obviously, in the 20th century, we get into all sorts of things where multiple things are possible. But in science, classical science, we maybe at first in science, we believe that the universe is like a clock, and that knowing the initial conditions of the clock will allow you to, in effect, predict the future, to know what must happen given a set of conditions. But here, back to the poem, two things can happen. They swerve to the left or they swerve to the right because of this, notice, because of this uncaused cause, which uh, makes possible, which is the very thing that will cause a range of possible outcomes, which we would, I guess, have to call free will. But look at this. In the poem, we seem to have a situation where this fire cat um, creates a situation or is inherent in a situation where two choices can be made. Um, Unpredictably, notice. We didn't say which one was more likely than the other, just that either could happen. And yet, in both situations, when we sketch it out, we see that no collision arises from that, which is actually ironic because it is the collision in Epicurean, I guess, physics, if you want to call it that. It's that condition, that collision, from which all matter and form arises. Uh, Additionally, this seems to uh, cohere with um, the moral philosophy of Epicurus, because if you notice in both cases, uh, in the stated poem, although there is no collision, which is curious, they do avoid pain. They do avoid the whatever psychic or physical discomfort. Well, obviously, as a result of what they did, which is entirely accidental, they do avoid pain and they do swerve, obviously, in order to avoid some sort of something that they want to avoid or some discomfort um, that was potential in the situation. Okay. Now, there is more I want to say about this, but the video's already gone long, so I will continue in a third video, I think tomorrow. Thanks for watching, if anybody's watching. Bye bye.